There's this thing that happens to me in the grocery store. I'll be standing in the cereal aisle holding two boxes. One is $3.49, one is $5.29. And even though I can afford the $5.29 box, even though the difference is literally $1.80, I feel this tightness in my chest, this low-grade anxiety that is completely disproportionate to the actual decision in front of me. And I'll stand there longer than any adult should stand in a cereal aisle doing mental math about $1.80. And eventually, I put the expensive one back. Every time. Not because I thought about it, not because I made a rational choice, but because something older and deeper than rational thought made the decision for me, before my conscious brain even had a chance to weigh in. And if you grew up without money, if you watched a parent stress over a utility bill, if you ever ate the same thing 5 nights in a row because that was what there was, if you ever felt the specific shame of not being able to participate in something your friends did because your family just couldn't afford it, then you already know exactly what I'm talking about. That feeling doesn't leave when the money situation changes. It gets baked in, and it keeps running your financial life long after the circumstances that created it are gone. My name is Oric, and I spend way too much time thinking about the psychological roots of financial self-sabotage. If you're someone who grew up with financial instability and now finds yourself either terrified to spend money or completely unable to hold on to it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Let's start with something that most personal finance content completely ignores: the standard financial advice framework: budget your money, invest early, avoid debt, spend less than you earn. It assumes that the person receiving the advice is operating from a psychologically neutral baseline, that your relationship with money is clean and rational and just needs the right information loaded into it. That assumption is wrong for most people, and for people who grew up poor, it is spectacularly, almost offensively wrong. Here's a statistic that anchors this. According to research published in the journal Psychological Science, people who experience childhood poverty show measurably different neural responses to financial threat cues even decades after their economic circumstances improved. Their brains, when presented with financial stress, activate the same threat response pathways associated with physical danger. The body genuinely cannot tell the difference between a predator and an overdue bill if you were conditioned early enough to experience money scarcity as an existential threat. This is not a mindset problem. This is a wiring problem, and you can't fix wiring with a budgeting app. I want to tell you something personal here, because I think it matters for understanding where this video is coming from. I grew up in a household where money was a source of constant tension. Not dramatic, not abusive, just that low hum of financial stress that fills a house when there's never quite enough. My mother would check the account balance before deciding whether we could stop for gas or whether we needed to wait until payday. I learned very early that asking for things was a burden, that wanting things was dangerous because want led to disappointment, and disappointment was something we couldn't afford either. I didn't grow up in a crisis every single day, but I grew up with the awareness that crisis was always one bad month away. And that awareness, that constant background vigilance, shaped every financial decision I've made as an adult in ways I didn't understand until I was well into my 30s. And here's what makes this so insidious. The behaviors it creates are not always obviously self-destructive. Sometimes they look like responsibility, they look like frugality, they look like discipline. And that makes them almost impossible to identify as problems, because from the outside, and even from the inside, they seem like virtues. So let me break down the two major behavioral patterns that childhood money trauma tends to produce, because they look completely opposite, but they come from exactly the same root cause. The first pattern is scarcity hoarding. This is the person who grew up without money and responds by becoming intensely restrictive with spending as an adult. They have anxiety around any purchase. They feel guilt after buying things they need and can't afford. They oversave to the point of denying themselves basic quality of life. They track every dollar obsessively, not from a place of intentional planning, but from a place of fear. And interestingly, this person often struggles to invest because investing feels like losing access to money, which the scarcity-conditioned brain interprets as danger, even when intellectually they understand investing is growth. I am largely this person. That cereal aisle story is real, and it happens constantly. The second pattern is scarcity spending. This is the person who grew up without money and responds by spending freely whenever money is available because their nervous system learned that money is temporary, money disappears, money gets taken by an emergency or a bad month, so you better use it while it's here. These are the people who get a tax return and it's gone in 2 weeks, not on anything big necessarily, just gone. Dissipated into 100 small purchases that felt urgent in the moment because the nervous system is trying to extract value from money before the inevitable moment it vanishes. Now here's what most people don't realize. These are not character flaws. They are adaptive survival strategies that worked in the environment they were created in. If money genuinely was temporary and unpredictable when you were a child, spending it immediately was actually rational. If scarcity was the constant reality, hypervigilance about money was actually protective. The problem is that you carried the strategy into an environment where it no longer applies, and now it's working against you. Let me put some math behind this, because I think seeing the numbers is important. Let's take scarcity spending first. Say you're 30 years old and you get a $3,000 tax return every year. If your trauma response causes you to spend that $3,000 within a month or two every year, you've made a choice. But here's the actual cost of that choice. If you invested $3,000 annually starting at 30 into a basic index fund averaging 8% returns, by age 65, you have approximately $519,000. Every year you spend that refund instead of investing it costs you not $3,000, but roughly $14,800 in future wealth. That's what 1 year of the pattern costs. Multiply that by 15 years of working life, and you're looking at a behavioral pattern that represents well over $200,000 in lost wealth accumulation from a tax return that most people think of as a bonus. Now, scarcity hoarding. This one is sneakier because it looks financially responsible. But here's where it gets really interesting. Research from the University of Minnesota found that extreme frugality in adults with childhood poverty backgrounds often correlates with higher rates of anxiety, lower relationship satisfaction, and paradoxically, lower long-term wealth accumulation because the fear of losing money prevents them from taking the calculated risks, investments, business decisions, career moves that actually build wealth over time. So you have someone who is terrified to spend, terrified to invest, keeping cash in a savings account earning 0.5% while inflation runs at 3.5%, effectively losing 3% of their money's purchasing power every single year while believing they're being responsible. If you have $40,000 in a low-yield savings account for 10 years instead of an index fund, the opportunity cost at 8% average market returns is roughly $46,000. You didn't save $40,000. You protected $40,000 while the fear response cost you another $46,000 in potential growth. Trauma is expensive in both directions. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Auric, this is interesting, but isn't this just therapy territory? Like, what does this actually have to do with practical financial decisions? And look, I get that. I resisted the psychological framing for years because I wanted to believe that if I just had the right system, the right spreadsheet, the right investment strategy, the behavior would fix itself. And the answer is no, it doesn't. Because the behavior is not coming from a lack of information. It's coming from a threat response that runs faster and deeper than information. Here's the analogy I use. Imagine you learned to drive in a city where every intersection was genuinely dangerous. You developed this habit of slamming the brakes hard every time you approached a light, even when it was green, because in your training environment, green lights sometimes still meant danger. Now you move to a small town where traffic is calm and intersections are completely safe, and someone tells you, hey, you can ease off the brakes on green lights, they're genuinely fine here. Knowing that information does not stop your foot from going to the brake because the behavior was trained below the level of conscious decision-making. You need a different kind of intervention than just being told the new rules. That's money trauma. The financial environment changed, the nervous system didn't get the memo. So here's what I've actually done about it, and I want to be honest that this is ongoing work, not a solved problem. The first thing is what I call the separation audit, and this is specifically about learning to distinguish between fear-based financial decisions and value-based financial decisions. When I'm about to make a financial choice, I've learned to ask a specific question. Am I doing this because it aligns with what I actually want my money to do, or am I doing this because my nervous system feels threatened? The cereal example, the $1.80. When I ask that question, I realize immediately that the cheaper box isn't a values-based choice, it's a reflex, and just naming it as a reflex gives me a small but real window to make a different decision. This sounds simple. It is not simple. It takes practice, and it takes a willingness to be honest with yourself about the difference between wisdom and fear, which are not always easy to tell apart when you grew up poor